Hello, and welcome to My Favorite Games, a podcast for game designers to geek out about games they like to play. Today, I'm super excited to host Jaime Browne. Jaime is a software developer and lifelong gamer, having started the hobby on an Atari 2600 and Commodore 64. That's like a lot of great geek cred there. Together with his artist friend, he's designed his first board game, Amoebunnies, which is expected to launch on Kickstarter very soon. Jaime, thanks so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me.
So before we get into your background and Amoebunnies, the game that you've kind of brought to the proverbial desert island today is Eldritch Horror. Tell me about it.
Yeah, so Eldritch Horror is an adventure game set with the Cthulhu mythos. And adventurers go around trying to gather clues in order to perform objectives that will eventually help you defeat one of the elder gods. So you start off with some of the lesser gods, like Kathoth and Shub-Niggurath. I don't know how to pronounce these names necessarily, but the fourth one is Cthulhu himself. And then after that, they came out with a ton of expansions. So the great thing about it is it has a ton of replayability.
Is that what originally brought you to it?
I wouldn't necessarily say that is what it brought us to it. We were looking just for a game that my wife and I could play together. And it was one that hit our table. And then when we played it, we realized that, hey, this has quite a few characters. It's great. It's right at the difficulty level that we enjoyed, where we lost at first, but then we learned how to play, and then we got good enough to beat the bosses. So we moved on to the next boss and the next boss. And then we continued buying the expansions one by one until we got through them all. And we're like, this was so fun, let's do it again. So we went back to the beginning. And the thing is that not only do you get to play different elder gods, you will also get different characters. And each character has one unique ability that gets to influence the game some. And they also have a different starting item, which does influence how you play the game as well. So, the first couple times we play, we're picking the guys that have the strong powers and the good items, and then we would switch it up and we'd be like, all right, I'll be this person and you be that person. Actually, we'd each play two characters to really make it interesting. And then we'd go as far as we could without having any characters die. And if they die, then we could replace them with one of the other characters, but they're dead for the campaign, and you just keep going. And that's something that we really appreciated in a game, was just we can play it over and over again, and it feels a little bit different each time. And even though we've played the boss before, the game has enough randomness in it that it's going to play differently. But because we have played the boss before, we'll have a better understanding of the strategy needed to defeat that boss. It was great. It's the only game that I rated a 10 on BGG.
Wow. High praise indeed. What do you think is the special sauce there? I think a lot of the have the appeal of being highly replayable, but is there something like a bit different, especially if it's the only game that you're ranking a 10 on? Is there some bit of magic dust there, or do you just think it's incredibly well execution?
I think it just hits my sweet spot on like every metric, right? So the amount of replayability is great. The theme is great because it's recognizable. The mechanics were easy to learn and not overwhelming, because like we don't really get into Euro games. Those are really complicated for us. But Eldritch Horror was something that once we figured it out, we used to take 4 hours to play the game. We got it down to 2. And that was very good for us. That's the amount of time that we wanted to spend doing game time together. And then we could go off and do something else. It didn't feel like it consumed our whole night, but it didn't feel like we were doing all this setup for something really good, for really short. Overall, it just hit everything that we wanted exactly where we wanted it. And so that was the base game that I rated a 10, to be fair. The expansions I rated separately, and some of them did get below that because they introduced some mechanics that were less fun. We weren't big fans of the poison mechanic, but some of the other expansions did introduce some good things that we really appreciated. So overall, definitely a great game.
Do you have an opinion about what makes a good expansion? In terms of, I think a lot of people, a lot of game designers, whether they think about expansions at the beginning, at the offset or not, expansions are like a well trodden route to trying to take advantage of a fan base that might find what it is that you're making appealing. So for some people, it's oftentimes an afterthought. Thinking about like it's literally an afterthought. Oh, the game did pretty well. Maybe we should think about an expansion. As a player, do you have a particular kind of view on what expansions, what elements within an expansion, how much can you mess with the game, how much is it theme versus introducing new mechanics that make a really good expansion?
Well, it's definitely going to be just an opinion. I'm
Yeah, of
not
course.
an expert on it, but from my perspective, the expansion needs to add on to the game in a way that doesn't interfere with the game. A lot of them, I think, feel like bloat. You're really putting more there than needs to be there. And one of the good things that Eldritch Horror does about it is, like, I dislike the poison mechanic, but the poison mechanic is boss specific. So if you don't have a boss that does poison, it's not relevant to the game. Same with the frostbite mechanic in one of the other ones. Um, One of the other expansions, however, introduced a resource called Focus. And that really fixed an issue with the game where sometimes you felt like you had 4 actions per turn and you've used 3, but there's really no good thing for you to do on that last action. So adding the focus mechanic let you focus, which gave you a token, which you could turn in later for a benefit to your die roll, basically. And so it was a really good. I've got nothing better to do, and it fixes that issue with the game. So that was a great thing for the expansion to do. Um, Definitely, the extra bosses helps, but you definitely don't want to just like throw extra things in for the sake of throwing things in because you will end up making your game worse as a result. And that varies from game to game what that means. So for mine, just for a quick example, I'm not changing mechanics, I'm just adding characters because I wanted to keep it simple.
So that was going to be my next question. Has Eldritch Horror for, impacted the way that you've been thinking about Amoebunnies? First off, I guess it would be helpful to explain what is Amoebunnies, and what's the game that you've co-created.
So Amoebunnies is an asymmetrical game for 2 to 6 players. Every character plays completely unique, very different goals, very different objectives. They move differently, and whoever can complete their objective first wins. Uh, so it's just a race to see who can do that first. And so for the expansions, it's really just adding new characters. We didn't want to add new mechanics because, well, I mean, each character, as I said, has their own unique movement and abilities. So those new characters have their own unique abilities as well. Um, but there's no extra thing for the base game. The base game is still itself, and so we just want to have the characters be the sauce of the game. So if you have one more character, it just adds more to the permutations of the game, which hopefully is the replayability that we're looking for.
And these characters that you're talking about are amoeba bunnies.
Yes. Yeah.
What are amoeba bunnies?
So basically, how that came to be is my artist, Darcy, a great friend of mine, she was sketching in her sketchbook and just ended up drawing these cute little amoeba rabbit creatures. And some of them were very tiny, some of them were huge. She was just having fun playing in her sketchbook. And she sent me some pictures and said, "Hey, look, I made these amoeba bunny things." And I'm like, "Amoeba bunnies? You should get rid of one of the buzz and just call them amoebunnies." And so she just created them that way.
So talk us through, like, how did you go? So you're a software developer.
Yes.
And you're a committed like gamer. How did you go from liking to play games to saying, you know what, why don't I make one?
Well, all right. Let's go through the whole story then. So basically, after she had done that sketch, we decided, these are really cute. It was the age of mobile gaming. This was around 2011. So I was like, I want to challenge myself to make a mobile game. Uh, so let's see what I can do. I had a game idea that had been kicking around in my head for a while. So I loaded up my Android development kit and started working around. And the first game idea was really bad. And I quickly learned that, and it didn't really work the Amoebunnies into the theme right. It didn't make sense. So then my wife had a suggestion, and it was the era of Candy Crush and those Match 3 games. So we tried to make one that was in theme with that. So basically, the Amoebunnies would be dropping from the top of the screen. If you made a square of the same 4 colors, they would merge together and grow, and then you could click it and it would pop, and that's how you would clear them. But in order to do that, we would need 7 individual, differently colored bunnies. So Darcy then said, okay, challenge accepted. And then she went and created the 7 original Amoebunny characters. Unfortunately, about halfway through the development of the game, I was required to stop working on it, and it was put on the back shelf. I still have it on my phone though for fun, um, and then it was in the back burner for a while. Darcy would still send us pictures from sketches now and then. She would send us cute little updates about the bunnies and things for birthday presents and things. But then it wasn't until 2017 where the characters resurfaced. I decided to do a Twitch stream for a little while. It only lasted about 9 months, but when it started, I asked Darcy, hey, a lot of Twitch streams have themes. It would be great if I could use the Amoebunnies as a theme. And she was all on board for that. She drew me updated versions of all the characters, helped me with an overlay and some other screens. So I used all of that. And then I created a bot for my channel that I called Amoebot, and my viewers could interact with it. They could join teams, so they could pledge themselves to the different characters, and they could play games with the bot, and they would always like cheer on their individual teams. So when we had community events, you would be representing your team. And then when we eventually ended the stream, we fast forward to 2021. And my parents had seen these characters before, and my dad gets really into it. He's very excited about the characters. He thinks certain animated studios would really love to have these characters. And I agree, but I don't think that they necessarily know that they exist yet. But he said that we need to do something with these characters, or he's going to do something with them for us. And so we're like, okay, well, what can we do? And we kind of thought about a children's book for a little while. But the problem is, while Darcy could absolutely draw a children's book and she would do a fantastic job of it, I am not a writer. So while we spent some time trying to workshop some ideas, we didn't really find something that we felt was good. So what we ended up doing is I said, give me a weekend. I'm going to try and throw together some ideas for a board game, because some of the people from my stream, we'd been playing board games on Tabletop Simulator for a while because of COVID. And so I was just like, hey, what if I tried to put together an Amoebunnies themed board game for us to play just to have some fun. And that's how we ended up working on Amoebunnies. I managed to get 5 of the 6 characters to what they are sort of to their base now. We had one that after 6 months of testing definitely proved that it wasn't the right way, and we redesigned her. But if you go back to the original set, you would absolutely recognize 5 of the 6 characters as playing the way that they do now.
So what caused you to say, you said you and some of your um, stream buddies were playing on Tabletop Simulator, and what though goes into shifting gears from I've been enjoying playing a lot of board games. I have this IP, if you want to call it, like I have this beautiful artwork that needs a home. What goes into thinking like, oh, I can actually make a board game?
Well, I didn't know that I could, first of all, because I've been trying to make games sort of a little bit here and there for a while. Mostly video games, though, because that's where I grew up, at
Your
camps.
Ataris and Commodores.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I used to do, I had 321 Contact magazine, which would have basic programs in there, and my dad and I would go to our computer and just put the programs in together, which often they were games. I went to computer camp once as a kid, and they had a casino night where we could put together some programs for it. And I ended up making a roulette, a slot machine, and a horse racing game there. And so I've always been like trying to make games, but things have never been. I'm a coder. I'm not a graphic artist. I'm not a lot of other talents that are needed in order for all of the bits to come together. Um, so my first like major game was in college, when I was really learning how to program, because until then I was completely self-taught, never really had any courses. The computer camp, while they taught basic, I already knew basic at that point. Um, but then for college, when I was learning C++, I was like, okay, I'm going to put my new skills to the test, and I want to create a game. I made a little game called Ages of War, which is basically just two decks of cards that have offense and defense. You play one, and then you can play a number of attackers and then attacks, and if the opponent has defense, they have a chance to block it, and then who can ever get the population to zero first wins. It was a very basic game. But for the next several years, every time I learned a new programming language, I would reprogram Ages of War in that language as a test. So I ended up programming it in C++, C Sharp, Java, on Android, and all sorts of things. Um, but I was always using very basic art, and I knew the game wasn't really engaging. There were a couple people that played it and liked it, but it was only fun for a few times. So I was learning what the reality of game development is while you like your ideas, they might not be the right ideas. And in order to have longevity and wide appeal, you have to be able to step back from your project and have a wider view of what's going on. And I think that's helped a lot. Um, and then I eventually did an actual mobile game. So after the Amoebunnies paused mobile game, when I was able to make mobile games again, Darcy wasn't available to do any more art at the time. So I just made a game that I called Hexus Hold'em, which was a game where you deal cards in a hexagram or a hexagon pattern, and your objective is to find the best poker hand by drawing your finger across 5 cards on the board. And if you can find the best one, you'll get bonus points, but you'll score based on whatever hand you find. And you've got like 5 minutes to score as many points as you can. And I think that's a fun game, but not very many other people did. So it didn't get a whole lot of downloads. And then Google also did not like me misspelling Hexus Hold'em, I guess. So like anytime I tried to search for them, it would say Texas Hold'em. So it was very difficult to get organic traffic.
So then, though, bringing forward, like, then how did you take go from that to say, making a board game? Like, did you then approach it slightly differently in terms of having that validation of making sure that other people were liking it at every stage? Like, how did you approach that?
The impetus was obviously my dad telling me, do something with these characters. So that was the start. After that, it was, okay, so what kind of games do I like, and what kind of games does my table like? Because while Eldritch Horror was a great game for myself and my wife, it was not a great game for my tabletop simulator table. mostly because we had only 3 hours to play our games, and if it took two people 4 hours to play when we didn't know, it was going to take these guys a lot longer in order to play our games. And so anything that went over our time limit was out. Also, the rules were really complicated. There were tons of decks to shuffle, and it just wasn't worth it. So through the process of that, I was the scout. I would keep looking for different games that I could bring to the table, and eventually I found one that like hit a lot of our boxes, but it didn't end up making the table because it was a little too complicated and it was a little too cutthroat, and we're a very Care Bear table. So I wanted to make one that was similar in its asymmetry, but it was more approachable in that it was faster to learn, easier to play, and it didn't make us fight each other. Because we'll play games like Cartographers where you'll have to put goblins on each other's boards. And while I've been raised competitive, so I'm not nice with that kind of thing, some of the people on our table will literally put them in the nicest possible spot so that you take the least amount of penalty. And I didn't want to have a game that encourages you or requires you to be mean. So we've definitely designed some of the characters to be friendly with mutually beneficial mechanics. Uh, so that's really how Amoebunnies came to be, was how can I find the game that we want to play? How can I make the game that we want to play? And over the course of a lot of testing with these people, they helped shape it to where we wanted it to be and balance it in a way that, regardless of which character you play, you're having fun and have a fair chance of winning.
And how have you then validated that? Like, have you been prototyping it with your kind of core group? Have you gone about playtesting in a wider way that allowed you to kind of take some lessons from your video games, mobile games?
Well, so for a long, long time, it was just testing with this group. We had a lot of understanding how the mechanics were working, how they weren't working before we brought it to anybody outside of our group. It was probably nearly a year of how to structure the board, how to fix the characters. We had that one character that just wasn't working, so we scrapped her completely and rebuilt her from the bottom up. Um, but when we felt it was good enough, we signed up for a prototype testing event that was online, and we started signing up for some conventions. So we signed up for BGG Spring and for Dice Tower East. And we didn't know what we were doing. We were just like, we know that if we're going to get this out there, we need more playtesters than what we've had so far. And we need to have people see it and tell us what they think and find out whether or not this is really a thing. So we went to the online one, and that was brutal. It was a lot of designers who have a lot of ideas about what they like in games and what they don't like in games. And I got a lot of feedback that wasn't all positive, and it was very frustrating. And at the end of that event, I honestly almost wanted to quit. It took a lot of support from my wife and my coworker, or my partner on this, and the people that have been playing it, to convince me, hey, they've got their opinions, but they're not the only ones that matter. We've got these events that are coming up. We're committed to them anyway, so let's do them and see what happens. So we started working on our booth for BGG Spring, and we had no idea what we were doing, so we just put together some basic banners. It was, looking back on it now, you can just see how amateurish our booth was, but it's totally fine. But the response we got at BGG Spring was just 180 degrees from what we had at the online one. And we had so many people that loved it and were excited for it. And we had a couple people that would come back again and again to play all the different characters. And that was the validation that I needed to say, no, there are people out here that truly enjoy this. And we need to keep going so that we can make this a real thing for those people. Then we got the same validation at Dice Tower, and we've continued to get that since.
Cool. And so, in terms of now Amoebunnies is coming out. It's launching very soon. What who's it for? Who's the kind of target market? I mean, obviously, if anybody searches Amoebunnies, you'll see these beautiful, cute amoeba bunny type creations. And as you say, it's an asymmetric game. Who's your target?
So generally, it's for a casual gamer. This definitely isn't one of your hardcore, chunky uh, Euro type games, but it also isn't a children's game. While it does have a lot of cute graphics, it's not for your 4 or 5 year olds or anything like that. There is some complexity. We do want it to be widely adopted by people. We've had people of all ages play it, from 6 years old to 80 years old, that have enjoyed it. So while we're going to put 10 plus on the box, we think it's a great family game. We also think it's a great casual game for any group that just wants something not super hardcore, that you can just focus on your own character and just enjoy the company of your friends while playing a good game.
So it's coming to Kickstarter very soon. Why Kickstarter? Why from a business perspective? You've been developing the game now for a little while. What made you want to go with launching it by a Kickstarter versus either pitching it to a publisher or exploring a different type of self-publishing option?
So with regards to a publisher, we did approach a couple. The major problem with a publisher, though, is, as we've discussed, the characters existed long before the board game did. And so we would want to make sure that we control the IP rights to the Amoebunnies. So it would be very difficult for a publisher to accept those parameters when we are an absolute nobody. So it would be tough for us to find that agreement in which they would be able to publish our game and leave us the rights to do anything we want with our characters still. We did manage to get through to some deep levels for some publishers, but in the end, they ended up deciding not to go with us, which is fine. We then took a look at which crowdfunding platforms to use. And obviously there's the GameFound, the backer kits, and the Kickstarters. And what we found was that while GameFound is obviously focused specifically on board games, it tends to skew towards your chunkier games and your really hardcore gamer crowd. And we felt that with a more casual game, we would have a better chance in a more general audience platform. And Kickstarter is also just your generic name for crowdfunding campaigns. So it's the one with brand recognition. It's easy to tell people who aren't familiar with it, yeah, I'm kickstarting, and they know generally where to go and what that means. So we went with that from that perspective.
Interesting. And what's next? Are you thinking about? I mean, I know we briefly touched on you thinking about Amoebunnies expansions, but are you slash you and Darcy, are you working on another game?
Yeah, so what happened with that is one of the major pieces of feedback that we received when we went to BGG Spring and Dice Tower was that while we wanted our game to be for casual gamers and not be a child's game, our art was very, very childish looking. It had very saturated, strong colors. It had basic shapes. And so people would look at it and assume it was a children's game. And a lot of people would literally tell us, that looks like Candyland. And that would hurt us because we know that our game is much more complicated, that much more interesting than Candyland. And so we needed to change directions on the art for the game. So we spent a year with Darcy just from the bottom up redesigning all of the art for the game, with the phrase that we were going with was less Candyland, more Flamecraft. So we wanted to maintain the cuteness, get rid of the high saturation, bring in some depth to the colors, um, so that when people look at this, they'll still see it's cute, they'll hopefully think it's fun, and they'll want to approach it instead of turning away. But in that year where she's working on the art, the mechanics of the game were basically done. We made some very minor tweaks for balancing, but there were no real major mechanical changes. So as a result, I'm sitting here with nothing to do. So I did start working on a second game. That game is called Always a Bigger Fish. That game is a King of the Hill style card game where each card represents a fish. It has a power number on it. You play these fish to the ocean zone, which whoever's turn it is in control of the ocean. When you're done with your turn, you add up the number on each of the fish cards for a total. You compare that number to the reef, which is the hill of the game. If your total is greater than the total in the reef, you gain control of the reef. So the reef fish are killed and discarded. Your fish move into the reef, and then you gain a trophy that represents that you are in control of the reef. So whoever is in control of the trophy holds the reef. Whoever's turn it is controls the ocean. If the turn can pass around so that it gets back to your turn while you still hold the trophy, you win. And that's the entire premise of the game. All of the fish have different special abilities so that when you play them, different things happen. And so that's where the complexity and the replayability comes in, because some of the design decisions for that one was that there's a short base deck of 12 cards that gets included in every game, but then there's 8 different sets of 20 that each game you'll pick some to add to the deck. So you're adding different combinations of fish to each game for that replayability and different experience each time that you play.
Interesting. So when is that coming out? Or is that just...
So that one's going to be quite a while. The reason for that is there's 96 unique fish that all need special art. Right now, they are all AI art, which we have no desire to release a game with AI art. But Darcy's been 100% focused on Amoebunnies, so we don't have any art available for that, and that art would take a very long time to do. So we are pitching that one to publishers because there is no IP involved in that one, so that one's a lot easier to let go of. Also, they would have the artistic resources to just say, okay, we're going to give this to the art team. They'll be able to knock this out in a month, and we can go from there. So we've got it in the hands of a couple publishers right now. Hopefully we'll get some good news, and we'll see where that goes.
How do you approach, or how do you take the approach for publishers? A lot of game designers struggle with the whole perceived game, pun, I guess, intended, about the whole, approaching publishers. Some focus on events, some just cold email. What have you found worked or works when you have an idea and you want to get in front of them?
Well, I don't know what works because I haven't gotten a game published yet.
But you're in conversations,
I have been. So the ones that I've contacted have been either through an event, like the online testing one that I went to had some publishers there. I talked to a couple. It's just that my game didn't fit their company's particular need, but I got some information which was helpful. At Gen Con last year, I just went from booth to booth to booth saying, hey, is there anybody to talk to about this? And for the most part, I learned that if you didn't have a meeting scheduled ahead of time, there was no way you were going to get one. But I just happened to walk into one company that was like, sit down, let's play your game, let's see what it is. He played it, he loved it, and he's like, do you have a print and play copy? I'm like, no, but I can make one for you. So when I got home from Gen Con, I built a print and play version for him. He got it, brought it to their test group. He thought that they liked it, and so they were going to pass it on up, but eventually we didn't make it passed around, and that was it for that. We've had other ones that we submitted to where they took a look at it, and then said, no, this isn't the right one for us. And that's just what happens. But the one for Always a Bigger Fish, we were at Dice Tower East this past year, and one of the people from Dice Tower played the game and said, that's pretty interesting. And then when they were talking over at one of the publishers, they sent that publisher over to me. So they talked to me at that point, and they played it and said, this is pretty cool. This really fits our style of game. Let's try and get this in the eyes of the decision makers for our company. So I just gave them a copy then and there, and so it's just been a couple months now. It takes a while. It's a long process. And you're competing with so many other games. So that's what makes this a really challenging thing, which is why so many people end up taking the crowdfunding process, because it's just, if you rely on a publisher, you might never get out at all. So we've always been going forward with the assumption we're going to have to self-publish, and if anything changes, we can see what happens when that happens.
Yeah, cool. Well, Jaime, thank you so much for taking some time to share your experience and geek out a little bit about Eldritch Horror with me today. If anybody listening would like to find out more about Amoebunnies or Wrong Cauldron, Jaime's company, you can find them on the web at www.amoebunnies.com. You can also search Facebook and Instagram for Amoebunnies as a username and find them there. Amoebunnies is coming soon to Kickstarter, which you can also find a link for in the description below. Jaime, thank you again for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.